Oh, thank you, Fran. It's a pleasure. Profoundly and completely and from the inside out. Yeah. I had 2 rounds of breast cancer in the early 70s, actually. And what it brought to my life was an awareness that I have an opportunity to choose life in every moment, regardless of how many moments I might have to live. And so I decided to choose to live as fully as possible and to fill each moment with love, with peace, with joy, and with life. And that really set my feet on a whole different path. Well, it's actually a fairly common experience for people who have had a near-death experience, and it's happening now for hundreds of people, if not more, who were in the World Trade Center and got out. I've been hearing stories already of people who made their way down those stairs, couldn't believe that they were still alive. One man in particular stumbled out of the World Trade Center as it was collapsing, and some stranger took him in and looked him in the eye and said, "You've got a second chance at life, don't waste it." And that's really what happened for me. Yeah. Well, you know, it's a fancy word, multi-track diplomacy, but it's a very, very simple concept. It's really a systems approach to peace building, and it simply means that all of us are peace builders, no matter what sector of society we might hail from. In the past, people have thought the peacemakers are the diplomats, the formal, appointed, political representatives of nation states. They're the ones who make the peace. And in the 80s and a little bit earlier, people in that world started saying, well, wait a minute, there are some informal processes that are useful and maybe even more useful than the formal processes. And so something grew up called Track 2 diplomacy. And when I came into that field, which was still quite young, in the late 80s, early 90s, I said, well, let's expand it and let's think of multi-tracks, many, many pathways to peace building so that individual citizens, through all kinds of programs, sister cities and witness programs and pen pal programs and non-governmental organizations, the education system, the business community, the religious institutions, the media, even the philanthropy community, they all have a role to play in peace building. And so the philosophy behind it is, let's honor and encourage all of those contributions, because only when they're working together can we get really viable and sustainable peace systems. It isn't enough just to sign a treaty. And empowering the people in those different sectors. So for instance, the business community in India and Pakistan, we've done some work there. This is not a community that thinks of itself as having a role to play. And yet when we brought it to their attention, they started saying, oh, well, yes, maybe so. What can we do? And the grassroots people, just private citizens from all walks of life in Cyprus, there are now thousands and thousands of them engaged in bicommunal work across the line between the north side and the south side, the Turkish side and the Greek side. Well, I think we tend to get hypnotized by the images, the words. I know, for instance, let's just take the World Trade Center attack a few weeks ago, and how many of us saw that image over and over, and it's playing over and over again in our minds, of the plane hitting the building and the people running out covered with ash. Those are very, very poignant, powerful images. And in a positive sense, they mobilize us and they say, wow, something important is happening here, and I need to get involved and engage with this. On a larger scale, the media can also kind of put us to sleep because we get so used to seeing images of violence. I'm not good with remembering figures, but there's some figure that's quite astronomical, like children up to the age of 15 see something like, I don't know, 25,000 images of violence in a year. I mean, so you get used to it and you say, no big deal. But it is a big deal. Well, when I realized I was going to be going to some of the war-torn places around the world And I also realized that for myself, I had an aversion to violence. I thought, how can I be effective there when you have to talk to people who are walking in the streets with guns or who are victims of bombings and shellings, and violence is a real part of their lives, and if I'm saying I don't want to hear about it, how can I be present for them? So I did a process of socialization where I gradually introduced myself to war movies, war novels, war memoirs, a lot from the Vietnam era, but also Civil War and World War II and one. And I actually went quite far with it. I got to the place where I could sit through a whole war movie and with interest. And then I even got a little farther, and I got to the place where I could identify with what I could call bloodlust, where the power of killing someone, you could feel in people's description how it would be an adrenaline rush. And once I recognized that that's in all of us, I was able to really have compassion for people who get caught in that. And then I knew I could do that work because I've had to work with soldiers. And well, I like to say that I kind of plug right into the universe. I mean, I have some very deep spiritual training from my teacher, the Venerable Dahani Wahu. And I have been trained to kind of center home, if you will, it's a word I use, to be present to the peace that is alive within each of us, and to feel and know and experience that as my home base, and then to make contact with that element in every person I meet. I had a difficult moment in the Middle East about a dozen years ago during the first Intifada, when I was in a small shop in Bethlehem, and there was some activity in the streets, kids throwing stones, soldiers chasing them, and soldiers came into the shop or to the doorway where I was and grabbed a young man who had been around me and hauled him off to a detention center, and everyone was clamoring in the streets that this wasn't fair, and they kind of looked to me. I was a foreigner, also Jewish, so maybe I could have some influence here. Do something, right. So, okay. So I went up to followed the soldiers and went into the detention compound, right to it's a chain link fence. Went right up to the fence, and there's soldiers with guns pointed at me and the crowd behind me, and I said, I'm asking you to release this young man. I know that he didn't do anything because he was there with me. I saw him there, and he's illegally detained and inappropriately detained, and please release him. And I remember the soldier said, after many harsh words, something like, this isn't any of your business. What business is this of yours? And I said, I'm a human being, and this is human business. And then the man was released. That was hard because I really didn't know. I mean, it was a delicate situation. I had an angry crowd at my back and armed soldiers at my front, and wasn't sure how it was going to go. Well, I can respond to that on many levels. At the human level, I'm just heartbroken, and my heart is really with the people there on both sides, and particularly with the peace builders there, because both communities have had dozens and dozens and dozens of human beings, peace builders, who have put their lives on the line, put their reputation on the line over and over again for years and years, working to bring people together, to increase understanding, to work for each other's rights. Really gone a long way in building that, in knitting that human infrastructure that's so important to give life and meaning to any peace treaty that's signed. And when the second Intifada started, that all went down the drain. People are quite desolate there. So at the human level, there's that. At the political level, I'd have to say that we have an opportunity right now to see, if we're prepared to listen and to hear, how that conflict is rippling out around the world, and how the Muslim world in particular views that conflict. It's not just propaganda. It's real. The Muslim world is very, very concerned about their holy sites in Jerusalem, do not want to see those holy sites under Israeli sovereignty, and the plight of the Palestinian people. Well, right now we really need, I think America and the Western world needs deeply to listen to the Muslim world, to the Arabic world, to other parts of the world that we have in the past, kind of
not paid as much attention.
Not paid as much attention to, not given as much honor and dignity to as they deserve. I think there's an amazing opportunity right now, and I have some feedback from the universe on this. I have this new book out, the Peace Book, 108 Simple Ways to Create a More Peaceful World. And it's really a how-to action book written well before September 11th to help people take some personal responsibility and do some simple action to build a culture of peace, not just to build peace, but to build a culture of peace, to really embed in the norms of our society that this is the way we live. Violence right now is really a key cornerstone of our popular culture and the assumptions we make. And I think that there's a whole movement happening to replace that with peace. So the book came out on June 1st, and it's not a book that can be bought in any bookstore. It's a book that people are sponsoring and giving away as a gift through their networks. So from June 1st to September 10th, we distributed 5,000 books through individual grassroots networking, sponsorship, but from June 11th, I'm sorry, from September 11th, for the next 3 weeks, 3,000 books. Yeah. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. Yeah. So people are seeing the moment here as an open moment to say, let's see what we can learn about how we can make a difference in this world. Okay, we can't prevent what happened on September 11th, and there are a lot of things that track one, the government is doing, but what can we as individuals do? Again, from a multi-track perspective, what can we do to change the climate in our communities? Because some of the same divisions, ways that we think about each other, ways that we talk to each other, the polarization language, us versus them, and right versus wrong, and good versus evil, that's in our national dialogue too. It's in our community life too. It's in our families. I come from a middle-class background, so that probably affects how I write. I see this book as suitable for anyone who's interested in replacing a culture of violence with a culture of peace. Now, when I wrote the book, I created a new business as well called Peace Tech, to get the human technologies, the tools that we need for building peace, building a culture of peace into the hands of people everywhere. And so I started doing things that business people do, which I had never done before, like writing a business plan. And in the business plan, there's a whole section that says, who is your market for this product? So I had to think, well, who is the market for the product? And I found that there has been identified a sector of society in America. It's variously called the Bobos, the Lohas, or the cultural creators. Now, Bobos means a combination of bourgeois and bohemian. In other words, people from values from the 60s who have grown up and gone into the mainstream, more bourgeois world, but they've kept the values of the 60s. And this book actually names Burlington, Vermont, by the way, as the capital of Bobohood, so Boboism, as one of many cities that exemplifies that. So Lohas means lifestyles of health and sustainability. So people who are interested in yoga, meditation, healthy living, healthy eating, vitamins, alternative health. There are no firm estimates. I mean, there's no firm figures, but there are estimates that this niche, you could call this group of people in the United States, numbers up to 40 million people. Yeah. And I'm hoping that see this book in the hands of 3 million people, all by giving it away, because 3 million is 1% of the U.S. population, and that can create a critical mass shift in thinking. Oh, Fran, it would break your heart. Children, of course, are the first victim of any war. And again, I wish I could remember numbers, but the numbers are staggering, and it would just bring tears to your eyes to realize how many children around the world are suffering the direct effects of war and the indirect effects of violence, and in our own country as well. Violence in the home, violence in the streets, and also there are hundreds of thousands of child soldiers around the world. Young children who are given drugs and alcohol and guns and told, you're now part of our army, and the ways they are initiated they're almost unspeakable. And it's not okay for us in America to say, oh, isn't that sad, and that's all over there. It's happening in the United States, in our cities, in our gangs. Young children are doing the same thing. The whole generations are so damaged. Well, this is a very big subject. We could talk, for instance, about structural racism as a form of structural violence. That racism is embedded in some of the basic assumptions and structures of society, and so much so that it's become invisible. And people in the privileged sectors of society don't notice it, but people, African Americans, notice it very much. So, for instance, the access to education, the access to housing, the access to job advancement. It's different for people of color than it is for white people, has been historically and continues to be. I gave a keynote address for an Earth Charter Day about a week ago, and I gave here's some things you can do. This was after September 11th, but before we started bombing Afghanistan. And one of the things I suggested for people on an individual basis is to go on a fast of polarizing language. Polarizing language is language that says us and them, either or, right and wrong, good and bad, we're good, they're evil. Any language at all that sets up that disparity, because as soon as you polarize in that way, you have automatically diminished the other, raised yourself in relation to them, and set up the stage for seeing them as less than human. And once you see them as less than human, you can justify all kinds of things. You can justify all kinds of violence. So I'm suggesting people not only pay attention to their own language for how it creeps in, but also to the language that other people use, including our leaders, and call them on it. Oh, I have great hope for that. I think that's really the evolutionary moment of humanity. I think that's where we are. We're looking at ourselves as a global family more and more, and we're realizing that it doesn't work anymore. The structures we have built that pit one group against another, or say one is better than and more worthy than another, it doesn't work. And we're seeing the direct results of it right now. Because groups who have been that down bottom group are saying that doesn't work for us. We're going to fight back. And we're realizing that in our human family, we have two simultaneous phenomena going on. One is we are different. There are many differences. And the other is we really only are one family. You know, there's a unity principle here as well. And the human family is at that moment where it has to decide, are we going to continue to give energy to the separation of the different groups, or to find ways to honor the unity? And it's a survival question.